off the rails, going off. If any of you are musicians, I'd love if you made a theme song for us. Alright, hey everybody, this week I'm going to share the bonus tier, $5 tier screencast that I make every week, which is a pool of photos of those at the $5 tier level on Patreon, where I go over usually a subgroup, which are the bonus tier patrons, which is about 20 people or so. This week I'm taking a sample of all of the $5 tier people. Looks like 35 photos that I have picked out, and just gonna do a bit of a critique, bit of a screencast critique, letting you know my thoughts, what I would do differently, any flaws that I see, any compliments I may have. Those are less usual. If you'd like a screencast like this one every single week, do feel free to check out patreon.com at the $5 tier. You get access to view the screencast and at times a critique of your photo as well. I try and include everyone in the tier at least once a month. So without further ado, this is from week number 8, pairs. And there actually are no pairs as in PARS in this pool. So that's a good start. Just joking. Let's go through it. Number 1, this is in the order in which you signed up for an account. Kinda in the order in which you're in the project, let's say. Allison. So I would have to imagine, I really like this one. I'd have to imagine this was taken with a flash, some kind of off-camera flash, because your shutter is at 1/125, which is not fast enough to really freeze the action like we're seeing here. I think that's a really clever job, really nicely done. If I'd have to give this critique, perhaps a more unique angle would be in front of the dice, meaning getting the thrower in the background. So if you can kind of picture, rotating here to your left so that we could see the thrower, maybe even see the thrower's face and the thrower's hand, and then the dice are being thrown at the camera. That would be interesting. Maybe taking it up a level, maybe not. I don't know, but that's just an interesting thought I had. Diane, this is a really nice, really nice poignant photo. You got a pair of what looks like fireman hats here. Very old looking fireman hats. So yeah, I don't know. You have one blurred out. So I think if already you're just showing one of them, you may want to get closer, show the detail, and really blur out the other one a bit more. Also, you have a lot going on in the background. I'm not exactly sure if it helps to highlight and create contrast where we're really only focusing on the main subject of the hats. Perhaps you could have angled so that, look, you have a lighter subject in these hats. They're pretty white. They're pretty well exposed. So try and find an angle, cut an angle, keep rotating your point of view and your body so that the background changes, right? Kind of do circles around your subject and see what that looks like with different backgrounds of the same subject. Perhaps, if there was more of a darker background, then you would have allowed these lighter subjects to pop more. If I can get a little bit more technical, we're not seeing your EXIF here, but excuse me, if you had a zoom lens, if you were able to really zoom in more and take a few steps back, then that would create what's called compression, which would kind of extend your background, kind of make it wider, and then you could have maybe had this darker area, this black background, take up the whole frame. That's a little bit more technical. In general, look at your background. Are these lines helping you or are they hindering? Here I think it's a little bit cluttered. Danny, I love this shot. We've seen this before, your classic pair of sunglasses on the beach, but I think this is just beautifully done. Really nice thirds and lines, and it's just really pretty. It's just done well. I really like the lines here cutting off the frame. Just a really nice composition there. Okay, Garnet. This no critique here. This is perfect. So, just a quick technical critique. If I zoom in, I mean, this seems clear to me that this was shot with a phone. Let me just see if I'm right. Adobe Photoshop, Lightroom, Class. Oh, here, iPhone 8 Plus back dual camera. If you're going to shoot with a phone, definitely use the rear camera. Don't use the front-facing camera ever. I mean, unless you're shooting a selfie, I mean, I guess it makes sense, but the front-facing camera on your phone is generally a much lesser quality lens than your rear-facing camera. Much less. So that's at least one takeaway. If you don't know that, that's really important. But still, you do get, at least today, this may change in the next few years, which I think it will. You do get a phone quality vibe, and that's most apparent in these details, which what would be almost a blurred bokeh with a nice lens or a DSLR type of gear. And I'm just zooming in a stupid amount, but you get this like painterly feel, almost looks like a filter effect. And this is just typical of shooting with a mobile device, which is fine. It's a lack of detail that you're getting when you really zoom in. You'll probably start to notice that, if you ever put this to print, blew it up, put it on the wall, you would start seeing these imperfections, just pointing out that exists. Melissa, this is just fascinating, really beautiful and poignant shot. I'd have to imagine this was taken with artificial light, some kind of studio setting, because the lighting is just so spot on. Your background is completely black. I don't know how you set this up. I am very impressed. Really beautiful. Okay, Deborah, you got a pair of socks. Double pair. Maybe that should have been the extra credit. Pairs. Also shooting with a phone, iPhone XS Max. Man, what XS Max? How many? What phones used to just be so much simpler, right? I don't know, you had your 1, your 2. You just had like this model or that model. XS Max. Do you say that every time when people, oh, hey, Deborah, what phone do you have? Do you have to say that whole sentence every time? That seems like a big waste of time. You could do so many things with those extra seconds that you're calling out the entire model of your phone. Anyways, so we got a pair of this. I'm sorry for that digression. I don't know why that upset me so much. It just, I don't know. You add an S and an X and you charge a little bit more, a little bit less. We should start at 52 frames max. XS. Interesting. I'm going to give that a thought, actually. So that's fine. You shot with a phone. I do appreciate that. I shot with a phone this week. Nothing wrong with that. So aside from some of the quality loss, which I pointed out in the previous shot, I think this is more, look, especially if you're already a little bit at a handicap quality-wise, you're maybe not using the best glass, or you're maybe not dealing with the best lighting situation, whatever that handicap is that you generally have in a scene when you're not completely setting it up in a studio setting, you kind of should think like, well, okay, how do I counteract that to at least get the most optimal, let's say, compositional settings, or the most optimal lighting settings that I can get here, or the most optimal angle or story. In this case, I think the socks are fine. Like the feet, I get it. It's a great story. But your background has basically cut off. You have a line going straight, at the 80% mark here in the frame. And then there's also a line here. Is that adding to the story? And these logos on the chair, is that possibly distracting? I think if you perhaps got lower, maybe put your heels on the edge of the chair, shot a little bit lower, and then we would get and zoom in on the feet, and then maybe get some background, or maybe get this floor as a background, and we just see the socks. Think about what your story, what your photo is saying, what I like to call end to end, frame to frame, right? Corner to corner, what what are all the elements in the scene giving? And I think in this case, this background may be a little bit distracting, similar to Diane. Just, pay attention to your background. I think this comes up often in my screencasts. Let me see if I have another one here that speaks to that point specifically. I don't think so, actually. So in general, this came up in last week's screencast, and I think it's just a really important takeaway. In general, it was kind of my first critique also, is what is the background doing for us? Rotate, turn around, and something like this is an obvious example. These are obviously, because that's more of like a studio setting, but also something like this, it's super clean. You see when the backgrounds are clean, end to end, right? Corner to corner, you are able as the viewer to really imbibe this scene. You're able to just take in the scene in a much more pleasing way, which is kind of what makes a good photograph, I think, right? The viewer takes it in, feels good, or feels bad, it's art. Alan, I'm not really sure what the pair is here. I see a foot and maybe, is this one person walking? So I'm not really sure, but it's an interesting shot in that it made me think. I'll give you that. Maybe if you zoomed in and maybe if you had a person's hands on the glass, that maybe could have been a little bit more obvious to the viewer of what's going on. Jane, it's just a beautiful, detailed shot. What I like about this is that you went with a really shallow aperture, not a wide aperture, meaning higher number, higher f-stop, f14, which means you get more in focus, as opposed to, let's say, this guy over here. Heidi shot with a 70 to 200, right, at 150. It's pretty zoomed in at f4. So all of those will give you a really shallow depth of field. f4 is a very low aperture number, very low f-stop, which is what's called a wide aperture. Which is, I know these terms are quite confusing, but basically, low number on your f-stop will give you some nice blurred background, give you shallow depth of field, so only a sliver of space in time, not space in time, just trying to be fancy, only a sliver of your scene in front of you, the distance to your camera specifically is going to be in focus, and everything behind that and everything in front of that will be blurry. Contrary to this, I'm losing the ability to speak already, only 13 minutes in, is when you do things like product photography or landscape photography. Sometimes you want everything in focus, right? So you don't want a shallow depth of field. You don't want a low f-stop. You actually want to raise your aperture as high as you can go. And this way you get almost everything in focus. We're getting a little bit of blur here on the toe, on the left shoe toe, or I guess maybe it's the right shoe toe. But I really like, just in general, that's what stands out to me right away, is that everything is in focus. Really nicely done. Very sharp image. There, 24-105. It's impressive. Okay, and beautiful leading line. Really nice story. Like I pointed out, not a lot of clutter going on in the background visually. And this is just amazing. Like, is this for real? Like, did you catch this, or is this set up because they're wearing the exact same thing? I think that's awesome. Okay, Nadine, this is really beautiful, abstract, really nice and clean. I am actually, on a second look, seeing a little bit of what I'd call a lack of clarity on this chopstick. And let me see. I mean, usually, oh no, this is shot with EOS 1200D. So it could be the glass. Oh, you're shooting with a nice glass, 60 mil prime. Okay, well your shutter speed is a half a second. So maybe that's where this lies. But it doesn't look like it's motion blur. I can't peg from your EXIF why I'm seeing a slight lack of clarity. Your settings actually look really spot on so that everything should be really sharp and in focus. And it could just be my eyes. But regardless, it's a really nice composition. I really like this clean abstract feel. And again, maybe less obvious, but you're creating your own background so that there is no clutter, right? It's just pleasing to the viewer's eye when you have a shot like this or a setup shot like this or even something like this where you're choosing the background, and by virtue of that fact, there is no clutter. These are super clean. Okay, Heidi. So I touched on this. I really like that you went, really long focal length, 156 millimeters on your 7-200. That means you're really zoomed in, right? That means you have a zoom lens that's able to go really far. And that does a few things. It does something called compression, which I touched on before, but that's a totally different issue. Maybe I'll get into that on a different screencast. That could be a good one to go over. It blurs out your background, right? It creates a shallow depth of field. And it just generally gives you a bit more of an intimate scene because it kind of makes your background appear closer than it actually is. And that creates a bit of a painterly feel like we see. It almost looks like a fake backdrop. And that, I think, lends itself nicely to this really lovely scene here, which is very cute. This pole does kind of cut through the frame here in a little bit of an awkward way. I think if you somehow could shoot this without the pole, I mean, I know she's sitting on it. Maybe that would be a little bit cleaner, but really nice Heidi. Okay, Suzanne. Beautiful eagle shot. I'd have to imagine this is also a zoom lens. What are you shooting with here? 300 millimeters. So that's really zoomed. It's actually not telling me the lens, just telling me it was 300 with a T7i. So, I mean, look, when you have a fast moving subject, you gotta shoot with a fast shutter speed. You're shooting here 1/500, which is a very fast shutter speed, but, and especially when you're shooting with a zoom lens, the more zoomed you are, right? The bigger your focal length, the faster your shutter speed needs to be. Because if you could picture, like when you're looking through a telescope, let's say, any tiny hand movements and the whole scene is shaking because you're so zoomed in. So you actually need to compensate for your handshake as well. Your handshake, not like a handshake, your arm movements. So 1/500 in this case, because of the moving bird and because of the focal length, is actually not quite fast enough. I am seeing submotion blur, which I think translates to what looks like just a general loss of clarity. And you'd have to really amp it up to, 1/1000, 1/2000 to really get this tack sharp. Patricia, this is just a really lovely scene. I like that it's real. I like that you're a beautiful couple. I think it's framed really nicely and really nice lighting. I just like that it's really, guys, cute. Just really nice smiles. Tammy, beautiful complementary colors here, which is a very good way of getting that orange-blue punch. Is shooting just towards nighttime, just towards blue hour, which I imagine this was. Well, this is saying 8 a.m. Date, time, original. 4 a.m. Was it shot at 5 a.m.? Let's see. Hold on a second. All right, so I just grabbed your photo in the album, and you wrote that lanterns are floated nightly on the river that runs through the town. I would have to assume that, where'd you go? early night, blue hour is what I was saying. That is a great time to capture this complementary pairing of blue and orange, right? Find a flame or a torch or even incandescent light. During blue hour especially, you'll automatically get that complementary pairing. That's also maybe a double pair in there, huh? Okay, Corey, I really like this shot. I'm not really sure what the pair is. I mean, I don't know. I assume you wrote in the caption, maybe it's a pair of temples or something, but I don't think it's too obvious to this specific challenge. Karen, so what I want to say about this, okay, you're in what looks like a restaurant. You got two beautiful subjects here. I'm going to go out on a limb and say mother-daughter, because you guys look exactly alike. Well, no, I did it wrong. I should say, I'm going to go on a limb and say your sisters, because then if your sisters, I got it. And if your mother-daughter, it's like, oh, that's so nice. But I screwed myself. I said mother-daughter. If your sisters, then I can't take it back. All right. Anyways, I'm going to go out on a limb and say your family. And it's a great smile. It's a nice pose. I think it ticks all the check boxes, right? However, what is my issue? My issue is, again, there's certain things that you just can't really control. And you got a dude here that's dipping his wonton in the background, which is good for him. And he's allowed to enjoy his food also. But is that really adding to the story here? This guy's hairy arms back here in the corner. So what I would say is to mitigate that somewhat is, like I mentioned earlier, is to control your aperture, right? You're at f6.3 here, which means you probably had some latitude to lower it. And on this lens, it looks like you could lower it as much as 3.5. I don't know how much that would really help, but it would blur the background a little bit more. If you had a lens that shot even lower, like 1.4 or 2.8, then it would be more of a non-issue because the background would start to blur. And even if there was an arm there, we wouldn't see so much detail, which means it wouldn't take away so much from our main subject. It wouldn't be as distracting. All right, Sandra. Usually, by the way, these aren't this long. Like my weekly screencast, I try and cover like 20, 25. So this is a little bit longer than usual. That's why I'm trying to go a little bit quicker on some of them. Sandra, I really like this shot. I'm also not sure if this is posed or if you found these girls in a park. Awesome that they're wearing matching coats. I would try and find ways to highlight that. So I would have perhaps got right behind them, and then you could see like the symmetry of their coats. Or I would get in front of them, have them put the hood on and get in front of them. I think that would really accentuate that similarity there. Cool. Patty, I don't know what this is. And I assume it's a bunch of pairs in a game, but I really like the way you shot it. Very clean, nice reflection. Just a really nice clean shot. Just looking at your gear. See, kit lens, XSI, 18 to 55. Interesting. So you shot at 1/10. So I imagine you were handheld or you had it maybe even resting on the table. And then a very high aperture, f14, which gives you the ability to make almost everything in focus. So well done on that. All right, B, I really like this shot. Even though the cat is, it's kind of like 2.5 subjects here. Oh, and you have like a little, what is that thing? It's not real, is it? This is really lovely shot. I like the lines. My only issue is that I think it's a bit askew. I'm seeing this line over here, which definitely looks diagonal. This line is a little bit less egregious, but I'd have to imagine that this entire frame could be rotated just slightly. I'll open it up in RAW and just double click on that guy. And then not much before or after. So Adobe is saying just a tad, but I mean, look, If I were straightening to the door, right, then it'll do more. Now the ground is a little bit askew. You have to choose your battles. I think you would want the door to be a straight line because the street could be at an angle, right? You could be going uphill or downhill on the street. Think of like a San Francisco house, right? If you straighten, as per the street level, then your house is going to be totally crooked. So pay attention to your lines, especially a liney composition like this, which is what I really like about it. You definitely want to keep those lines as straight as possible. I don't know why I got tongue-tied there. I thought I could maybe say that in a more eloquent way and quickly realized I could not. And in my head I said, Yosef, just say lines. Just say lines. And that'll be good enough. Okay. Ray Ann, how you doing? Great action shot. Now this is interesting, okay? So you're shooting with a 60D, which is a great camera and one that I used to have, which I used extensively. But it's not, as far as the sensor ability, it's not up to date or up to par of some of the newer sensors, specifically in one area, which is ISO sensitivity. I mean, that is really what you're paying the money for when you go up in body upgrades. It's just low light. And I tell everyone, I say this so often, when you have an entry-level, starter-level DSLR or otherwise, or a mid-range like this, like the 60D, which is totally capable, just understand the weaknesses of your gear. And this also comes into play for mobile photography. Low light will just destroy your images. It just will. It'll flatten things out. It'll introduce grain and ISO noise. And if you shoot at, midday, beautiful sun, or in the shade, it doesn't so much matter what you're shooting with. They're all going to be comparable quality. Comparable, okay? But the biggest difference is once you get into low light. Fine. I assume you have a lot of light here, but you had an issue. You have action in front of you. And like our Eagle before, you want a fast shutter speed to freeze the action. So you did that really well. 1/3000. And there ain't nothing blurry about this shot. These skates are tack sharp. There is no movement at all, which I think is really cool. However, to compensate for that fast shutter speed, which means you're gonna have a much darker image, you're not letting in as much light, you had to raise your ISO to 6400. Which is fine. That's what you had to do. But understand, with gear like the 60D, when you're going to those levels, that range of ISO of 6400, you're going to introduce what's called grain or noise. And if I zoom in a stupid amount just to show you what it looks like, this is not what this hockey player's pad or pants look like. This is just a total loss of detail. You see, even in the whites, it's just kind of a blotchy effect. I can't even see where the shirt ends and where the ice begins. So that is what I noticed first off, is that it's noisy. That's what they call noisy. It comes from film grain days as well. Similar concept. So I'm not saying you're wrong because you actually did everything perfectly, but just understand, if you need to shoot fast shutter speed indoors, right? Think sports photography, wedding photography. It's that moment when you actually need to pay for the gear. Everything else, I'm like, don't pay for the gear. You get what you could afford. They're going to be great cameras, and then you can use studio lighting. You can go out during the day, find a nice shady spot. Your pictures are going to be great. If you need to shoot in low light, specifically sports photography, which is the most expensive thing you get into, or wedding photography, at that point, You need to have gear that will hold up to high ISO levels. And you also ideally should have glass that has super wide apertures. Have lenses that can go really low f-stop so that you can get as much light in as possible while still getting a clean, clear, crisp quality shot, which is what you would expect from a sports photographer or a wedding photographer. But then you're talking about stupid amounts of money, and that's just the name of the game, people. Or just, set up, looking for an example, set up like nice little studio, keep the lighting not extreme, and the gear that you have will shine. All right. Lainey, I see you're monkeying around this week, huh? I should mention that I get a little bit crazy after the 30-minute mark on these things because I think my brain starts to fall apart. Very difficult to get a dark object or a dark subject in front of a dark background. But I think you did this really well, either by identifying the light or maybe brightening it up in post, because we see that this gorilla, I don't know the difference, sorry, I'm from New York, is more well lit than the background. So I just wanted to point that out, that's a challenging shot to get, but I think it's pretty remarkable that we're seeing the subjects not just kind of fading into the background. And you know what? Let me skip to Math here. Math, is that short for Matthew? It says your name is Math F9. So this is a really cool shot. Aside from some compositional critiques I may have, my biggest issue is the opposite of Lainey, is that our subjects actually are kind of bleeding into the background. I mean, even if we zoom in here, we can't see what is couch and what is shirt. Whoops, zoomed in too much. So if I may, and you would do this in camera, you wouldn't do this like I'm doing here, but just to show you, had you raised your exposure so that, oh, that's terrible. Why is it doing that? On auto mask. Get out of here, auto mask. Here, had you raised exposure, well, I think a more accurate, let me undo. We just raise the exposure, right? Something like that. So now we're seeing, kind of like lifted the shadows, kind of turned on the lights. Now you're gonna blow out the highlights here and what is coming through the window, and that's fine. There's only so much you could do, but you want to, what's the word? Favor or focus on, give more attention to your subject than your background as far as exposure. So better to have your subject well exposed, even if it means overexposing other elements of the frame. But I digress. Just wanted to kind of bring that up as a contrast. All right, let's see if we can go through some of these a little bit quicker here. Caroline, I just love this. I'm not exactly sure what the drink is. I assume it pairs well with a lemon. I think I see a hot spot here on the floor. I do think it's lit well, but perhaps the hot spot or the focus of the light should be more on the subject and then should feather out, I guess, behind it, in front of it, just the background in general. I don't think we should have, one of the more brighter parts of the image just over here. I think that's not really telling the story as much. And perhaps the subject is exposed well enough, and then you just need to block this light by creating what's called a flag in photography and video land, which is just a black card, let's say, or a black object or a curtain or your hand or whatever it is that's essentially blocking the light from hitting certain spots. That's like super advanced, but also totally doable and approachable at any level. You just need to flag off the light. So you could just hold your hand up in front of the hot spot, and you just kind of block it off. It's similar how you hold your hand in front of your eyes to block off the sun when it's too bright. So that's just something that caught my eye. Jim Lam, this is just so good. I mean, this could be in a magazine. It's just so nice. It's really nicely done. I mean, it just really speaks to me, this one. I like the tones. Definitely too orange, but I think it works here. It's strangely cropped, but I just think it works here. It's a little bit bizarre with the leg lamp and whatnot, but definitely telling a nice story. I think maybe for this specific challenge, you could have shown like the beer on one side and the pretzels next to it to really show a pairing. Because compositionally, I'm not seeing a pairing. I'm kind of seeing 3 clustered items in the corner. But that's, more specific to this week. I do like the shot in general. Sherry, beautiful pairing as well. I wonder how many wine shots we got this week. That looks like a nice wine. I want to design wine. I feel like the higher end wines have such nice labels on it, and I always think to myself, why don't the lower end wines just design a really fancy label and they can up their price? Anyways, what I'm noticing here is some shadow, right? So it seems like I'm not seeing it in the reflection, but you have a pretty strong light source from the window. I was going to say, it seems like maybe you were shooting flash even, but I don't think that's the case. I think what looks like from the reflection is some window light. Unless, what do we see here? What's this light over here? Maybe that is a flash. But whatever it is casting a shadow on the wall here. So the trick to getting rid of shadow right behind a subject is to simply move the subject away from the background, move it closer to the camera. And then you could take another light and light the background behind the table independently. And that would give you a much cleaner look. Okay, this is just so beautiful. This works for also Fill the Frame, which we had a couple weeks ago. Just adorable. I really like how you kind of cropped features out. You just filled the frame completely. Also a really nice background. Beth, this one I just like the story. You're telling a lot and showing a little. I like what you don't see here in this frame. Karen, this is a cool take that I think is different from all of the other photos that we've seen, where you took a pair, what looks like 2 pairs of shoes, and then a pair of, I don't know, some magazine or something or other, and then you did either a double exposure or what looks like a slow shutter and created that motion blur, which created this cool abstract even a triple pairing, quadruple pairing. I see now I'm seeing all kinds of shoes here. So I think that was cool, just to create a bit of an abstract vibe with a slow shutter. Dawn, so this is what I wanted to point out also in speaking about long lenses. I was saying long lenses give you a certain look. Where are you? Where the background will be blurred and the background will be stretched a bit. It has a certain effect. Long lenses give a very particular effect that you don't get when you're shooting. This, I imagine this was also a relatively long lens. Let's see what this is. 85. It's a nice focal length. So this is with a 7200 lens shot at 200, which is all the way at the end of the focal length, meaning all the way zoomed in, which is pretty zoomed in. Not as zoomed in as our crazy 300 millimeter Eagle, but 200 millimeters is generally like as much as you're going to go with typical lenses. And it's also at, it's at 3.5 out of it's a 2.8 lens. You could go as low as 2.8. So Dawn shot at 3.5. And what this does is almost completely blurs out the background. And it really creates this nice fantasy-like composition where your subjects are nicely in focus and everything else is, mostly blurred. Just beautiful, nice, touching, really clean, really nice shot. Just well done. Well done. Lee, I like this. You really found it in nature. I assume this is not set up This is totally the kind of shot that I would take. Notice where the sun is hitting, right? Look around, especially in beautiful areas like this. When you're walking around with your camera, look for the light. Where is, let's say, a shady spot that has pockets of sun coming through? And this is just beautifully captured because the sun is not everywhere. It's really just highlighting these two cute little subjects here. And you also managed to get their reflections. I think that's a fantastic capture. All right, the last couple. Nathan, great eyeballs. I would say, definitely minimalistic, and I think it works. But if you already had the googly eyes, I may have put it on a subject. You could put it on like a bottle of wine or something, or any of these, really. I think that maybe would have told a little bit more of a story. Michelle, I had to give this a look. It's really interesting. It looks like, I imagine, some kind of church setting. Oh, yeah, okay. That'll confirm it. Stack of Holy Bibles there. It's a powerful shot. Here's how I think you could have made it even more powerful, right? What are we seeing? We're seeing this woman with her arms spread out. So I think that is what should fill the frame. Meaning, had you gotten lower and shot up, and perhaps this woman's arms could have taken up most of the shot, and looks like a square crop, so picture the frame wider. And then if you're shooting up, you could see the singer is still in the background, maybe a little bit more blurred out. I think that composition may have been stronger. Okay, math, we got you already. Laurent, I just wanted to point out here that it seemed your shutter speed, maybe intentionally, was a little bit slow. 1/8 is a little bit slow for action, so we are seeing some motion blur. Even where it's supposed to be sharp, it isn't quite sharp enough. We're seeing motion blur on the hair as well. So I do think your shutter speed is a little bit too slow. Generally, 1/125 should be your starting point. That's what I always say. 1/250 if things are starting to move quicker. Like over here, this was 1/500 and that wasn't quick enough. But 1/8 is, I think, a bit too slow for this type of scene. All right, last two. We got Mary Lesh. This really gave me a double take. I was like, are these twins? Are they, is it an edit? So then once I zoomed in, I was able to see a little bit of a flaw here in the arm. So, I mean, again, when you're doing something like this, you really want to zoom in this much when you're editing, and you want to go over with a brush and just mask it on. I think you did this part really well. But you want to really just, get in there as detailed as you can, and then you can zoom out and it'll look more seamless. And finally, we have Dan. Dan, I'm not sure what the pair, I guess it's the pair, the car, and its reflection. Really funky. And I can't really tell exactly what the color of the car would be, but to me, it looks a little bit too yellow. Like if I took a white balance picker on the car itself, that's assuming the car is white. I don't know if the car is white, but I imagine it's somewhere in the middle. I think this would be a little bit more of an accurate white balance, color balance, than the yellow tinge that you have here. All right, that was a nice hearty 45-minute screencast critique. Again, this is the $5 tier patrons that go over your photos every week. And that's it. Thanks so much to everyone who supports the project and to everyone who contributes a photo. It just warms my heart. This community has grown in 2020, and it's just so nice to see. And I got bigger plans, bigger and better always. In the meantime, that's going to be it for this week. While my voice is still holding together, I'll see you guys next week. Happy shooting.